you start off being like, oh, my little sister, my big sister, and then you grow into that age of, I want to do more of the adult things, and I don't want to be around my little sibling as much as I used to, and then sort of reconnecting because like, oh yeah, like now that we're sort of closer in the sense of age mentality, we can do those things together. So yeah, I think people overblow the Joe and Amy relationship as if it is this full-on sibling rivalry, which it really is not at all.
I was really surprised because when I did the research on Louisa May Alcott's relationship with May Alcott, there was some sibling rivalry between them when they were younger. Like I said about the Angry Feminist and the 70s version, I think a lot of the Alcott schoolers, well, not necessarily Alcott schoolers, but public in general, when they are interpreting Little Women in different times, they always tend to go to TV version or a film version instead of the book. When I was doing the research about the sisters, it really boggled my mind that there were so many Alcott schoolers who were writing how, Louisa envied May when she was living in Europe and she was hanging out with Laddie Wisniewski. Then I read these letters between Louisa and May. It seems that they both were fed up with him. And I also got this feeling that not only had Louisa given him money, I don't know if it was for, shutting him down for their fling or whatever it was, or if she wanted to help him financially, I don't know. It seemed that May might have also borrowed him money because she writes in a letter to Louisa that he never paid his debt back. And people are always saying, Niina, you really shouldn't hate Laurie that much. I don't hate Laurie. Laurie, he grows in his relationship with Amy, and I really like that. That's a big part of his character. But I can't deny the fact that all these real-life Lauries, Laddie Wisniewski and Alf Whitman, was also a friend of the Alcotts. Laddie was an adult man, and he seems to have been borrowing money from his wealthy friends and didn't really seem to be very reliable or very interested in work. And then I think May also wrote about Alf that, he seems to be a bit lost in life and doesn't really have a direction. And that sounds a lot like Laurie. I read so many bad studies about Louisa and May and how they were fighting, quote-unquote, fighting over Laddie, who was living in Paris the same time as May. Then it doesn't really align with the letters that the sisters wrote to each other. And why on earth would they fighting about this guy? I think Louisa wrote Laurie to be this aspiring character who actually grows out from that disillusions that he has about artist life. It's not just Laddie and Alf who were models for Laurie. You can find it from all these different books that Louisa read and all these young men who she liked to hang out with. I think it's really dismissive for both the literal Joe and Amy and then the actual Louisa May Alcott and May Alcott to present them as these sisters who just were having this love and hate relationship and only thought about this guy who actually wasn't really that great. I actually really like Laurie in Ghost Boys and Little Man when he's helping Nat and he brings all these poor boys to Joe. He also always says that Joe was the one who raised him. Mm-hmm. He doesn't speak about Joe as his first love or girlfriend. I just don't like the romanticization of the young Laurie. I think a lot of these Alcott schoolers who try to present Joe and Amy, these people who just fight over Laurie, it's not based on the book, it's based on the adaptations. I say the same about the people who say that, Joe and Friedrich just argue. Well, they don't argue in the book. They argue in pretty much every single adaptation.
I always have felt that out of all of them, that Joe and Friedrich would be the ones that have the best communication skills because, like you said, they never argue or yell at each other. They always just somehow manage to discuss the situation. And I think people also sort of think that it's sort of like, they just know that, Joe has a temper. And they think she carries that throughout, that she always has a temper. But, she knows how to control it by the time she goes to New York. And most of the adaptations will have a kind of like play out as if like, oh, there's that temper of hers, but like no, she kind of learns how to control it thanks to like Marmee and even Mr. March when he comes back. But it's also not in Friedrich's nature to be argumentative either. He's not a temperamental type of guy. And as we find, Jo has tempers when she reacts to something negatively in a very strong way. Like, we never see her yell at Beth. She never yells at Beth for anything, even if they do disagree, because why would you yell at Beth? She's the least offending person ever. And I feel if I had to compare.
Hello and welcome to the Little Woman podcast. Before entering the podcast, I wanted to let you all know that a Little Woman podcast now has merchandise available at society6.com/littlewomanpodcast. There you will find stickers, posters, mugs, and t-shirts to fulfill all your Little Woman needs. Come and check it out. Link is also in the description. And now, to the podcast.
Friedrich to any of the sisters, it would be to Beth. You know, he is a very quiet, gentle soul who is, unlike Beth, is able to, when the moment needs to arise, he will stand up and say, no, I don't agree with that. He's more willing to put himself out there if the situation comes to it. He'll kind of sit there and be like, I may not agree, but that's fine. But if something, like as we see in the novel, when they're at the symposium and someone says something in regards to religion, that was like that moment where he's like, sorry, I need to stand up and say something, but in the nicest way possible with strong facts to hold him behind. And that's when Jo gets an extra boost of respect for Friedrich. So it would be very surprising and almost negative towards Jo's character to say, one, that this temper that she's been working on all of a sudden comes back, and to say that she would yell at someone who is so unoffensive. Unlike with like Laurie, who like yells and says these very negative things towards her, does she respond negatively? Whereas with Friedrich, he approaches it in a very kind and more gentler way. So there is no reason for her to respond in that way. Yeah, I don't really understand why people feel that it's so important to have them argue when it's not close to who their characters are, and it changes how you sort of almost see their characters, because why would Friedrich act that way when he doesn't, and why would Jo yell at him when there's no reason to yell at him?
And I think Amy also had a very calming influence on Laurie. Amy is a very visual person, and then you have Laurie, who likes these very pretty things. He likes nice clothes, and well, in the modern context, he would be a metrosexual. He's a man who likes to take care of his looks, which is kind of opposite to my man Fritz.
There are times when Jo makes fun of Laurie, like he likes to buy nice clothes and fancy gloves, and Jo laughs about it because why are you spending your money in these irrelevant things? So she doesn't really have much appreciation for Laurie taking care of his looks. And one of my friends pointed out that all the three couples have their own special aesthetics, so to speak. Like John and Meg, they have this whole cottagecore aesthetic. And with Jo and Friedrich, they are not too picky. Jo was that kind of person who didn't really romanticize life, even though Jo and Fritz are a very romantic couple, like you said. But Jo was never a very visual person. In Little Man, it's almost like she and Fritz have this mutual agreement that Plumfield is going to be this topsy-turvy, upside-down place. If boys' sticky hands make places dirty, that's okay. And we can have pillow fights once a week so they can release their energy. And then it's completely different in the Lawrence house, because Amy and Laurie, they like to have these fancy balls and dinner parties and things to be visually pleasing. And I always thought that Amy and Laurie were a match made in heaven, because him being a metrosexual, for example, was something that Amy found visually pleasing. And of course, Jo found Friedrich very attractive. I really love that scene when Amy and Laurie are in Europe, and she taps his hand and says that this is like a lady's hand. You haven't done any work in your life. And Amy knows the struggles of being poor, and Laurie doesn't have any experiences of that. And then Amy says that Joe hates lazy people. And Amy herself also hates lazy people. And that is Laurie's wake-up call. That's when he turns from a boy into a man. And that scene is never in any Little Woman adaptations between 1933 and 2019. Then if we think about Louisa May Alcott, she worked as a nurse in the war. She took care of sick people. She saw bodies lying around. She wasn't squeamish, maybe because she didn't really consider herself very attractive always. And that also had to do with her illness. When you read Little Woman, there is sometimes criticism the way people tend to pay more attention to the way things look outside than the way they look inside. You know what I mean. Joe is not a very visual person.
I almost forgot about the pillow fights. I was like, oh, that's so adorable. But yeah, each relationship works out for each of them in the best way. Friedrich and Joe are a little bit more like, oh, let's just do whatever suits us at whatever time. And Laurie and Amy are like this people who are like, we have to have dinner ready by 5 every day because we just have to. No earlier, no later. But it works for them because that is the lifestyles that they want. And if you have someone like Joe who is like, let's just eat whenever, whatever, and Laurie is like, no, I want to have this specific time with this specific meal, that's going to clash. Again, I think that's what makes how she handles these relationships very well, that it's not even just like, oh, you can trade one sister for another. It's like, no, they're so different. Their relationship with Laurie is so different that it will not have the same outcome as you think that it will. You can't have Laurie just be with Joe and expect it to have the same outcome as Laurie and Amy. It just won't. Not at all. And it's funny, like this is in some ways it's a story of like opposites attracting as well as people who are similar attract. Like you often hear people say differently, like he was someone who is completely different from you, but then you have some people who are like, get someone that is completely the same to you. And I gotta find the passage, but I think Marmee kind of said it perfectly. This is when Joe wants to leave for New York, and Marmee says, I think it's not just because of you wanting to leave, it's also because of Laurie. I gotta find it, but she says that as friends you are very happy and your frequent quarrels soon blow over. I fear that you both would rebel if you mated for life. You are too much alike and too fond of freedom, not to mention hot-tempered and strong wills to get on happily with each other, in relation that needs infinite patience and forbearance as well as love. So on one hand, the fact that they are very similar is going to be detrimental to them. That would ruin their relationship, because really what makes a relationship work is what is similar about the two of you is your morals, your points of views on some of the bigger topics of things and of your interests. But you need to be different enough to allow some sort of growth to happen, because if you have two people who are exactly the same and have the same sort of ways of living life, there's a very slim chance, I think, of them progressing into something more deep and meaningful. I think it's going to be a very kind of like, what do you want to do today? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. And then just you do nothing. Versus if you get someone that is at the very least a little different from you and you go, I don't know, what do you want to do? And it's like, well, why don't we do something a little different and out of our comfort zone, and let's do it. Let's go. Like, I think that in a way they both have that. Like you said, Amy pushed Laurie to be more responsible and to sort of realize like what a grown-up he needs to be. And Friedrich kind of helps ground Joe and be, and not to say, like, he tells her, like, you can still have that dream. Like, you can still be a writer. You can do it. I believe that you can. In a way, they both, Amy and Friedrich, are what Joe and Laurie need, because in some ways they ground them, but also give them what it is that they need, not necessarily what they want. Laurie thinks what he wants is a housewife that is just going to do what he wants him to do. what he needed was a wife that is like, you know what, you could stand to do a few chores around this house. I think that's why some people feel like have that idea of like Jill and Laurie would be great together because they're so similar, but like therein lies the problem. They're too similar and they're too like a reflection of each other. And I think if you spend too long and too often with someone that is just like you're going to see some of the more negative stuff about yourself and you're not going to like it. You're going to hate how you are as a person, and then you're going to maybe start resenting that person because you recognize some of the more negative stuff about yourself. You're like, you know what, I can grow and learn from this, but the person that you're with has not done the same, and you're like, I'm moving ahead and you're staying right there and we want different things. And so, yeah, I think no matter what, Jill and Laurie's relationship would have ended into the disaster because one will grow and the other will not. And you can't have a relationship where you're not going together somewhere. If you eat, whether it's the both of you stay in the one place or one stays and one goes.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you said that Joe and Fred, they don't really have any reasons to argue. Henry and Louisa, what I've read, they had this sort of telepathic way of communication that they would understand each other without words. I think you can see some of that in Little Woman, in Joe's and Friedrich's, the way they communicate. And like you said, well, they probably have the least problems in communication when it comes to the different couples in Little Woman because they know each other so well. So it's really interesting that Louisa and Henry would have this sort of telepathic rapport between one another. And, even though Louisa had temper tantrums, Henry was, what I've read, quite a peaceful person and didn't really care too much about arguing. I mean, I think it brings another extra layer to Little Woman and to Joe and Friedrich's relationship. I think you can see a lot of that in Little Men, especially when they have this sort of teasing conversation between one another. Well, they really don't argue a lot in the sequels, and they don't argue in Little Woman. Why would they argue? They really don't. They don't have any big conflicts. Joe and Laurie are the ones who have the conflicts. And even with Meg and John, well, I think there was a reason for that argument. And after that, they were a better couple. Meg realized that she had problems with leaving behind this idea that she did wish that sometimes they would have more money. And John realized that, well, Meg has more needs.
It's a growing thing, it's not easy. I mean, I've not yet to have been in a relationship, but talking between them, my friend and seeing my sister go through some of her relationships, it's a growing thing. You gotta learn each other's idiosyncrasies, and you gotta learn like what does it mean to have another person in your life that is so close to you. It's just like when people say, like, when they have kids, they have that realization of like, oh, I just have realized that it's not going to just always be about me. Sometimes it's about them. And that doesn't mean that you necessarily are sacrificing the overall picture of what you want for them, but just kind of taking a step back and going, like, I got to realize that even though I approach this situation this way, it doesn't work when I go it with this person of whom I am living with and love and whatnot. So yeah, I think that with Meg and John, it was because they were already so shy with each other in the beginning of their relationship that it took a little bit more time for them to sort of understand what does it really mean to be in love and to be married. They're such an underrated Little Women couple. It's such a sweet little romance that it's like, oh, they love each other, and like, watching them kind of blossom into these developed parents who truly care for their children, and surprisingly, John being a lot more hands-on than you'd expect any man from that time period to be hands-on with their kids. But yeah, it really goes to show that, marriage is not always as easy as one would think.
In Little Woman, when there was the catfishing sequence, I think there was a moment when afterwards Meg was like looking that Laurie wasn't going to do any kind of jokes with John. She was keeping an eye on him more closely. because she didn't want and nothing bad to happen to John. I think I would do the same if that happened to me. John is really underrated character. Like, I always love that scene when they're in the Camp Lawrence and he's defending Meg being a teacher, a governess. And he's like, oh, these American girls, they need to earn a living too.
Right.
Yeah, it's such a sweet scene.
I don't really think that moment in particular is really seen in any version. I mean, we do have certain versions that do have like the beach/boating scene and those like first hints of like, you know, oh, I don't have any family to worry about. Meg being like, oh no, well, I would miss you if something were to happen. Like, it's precious, and you know the fact that he is so patient with her because like he knows that he loves her, but you know he knows that maybe Meg isn't fully sure, but he's not pressuring her in the same way that the way Laurie would have. He just is like, it's all right, you know, I'll wait if you'd like, and I'm always here if you do realize that you do love me. But that's okay. You take your time. You do what you gotta do. Like he is such a sweet character, and the fact that he just wants he wants Meg to be happy, even at the sacrifice of getting a new coat for her to get a dress, is just so sweet, and it's such a big moment for Meg to kind of be like, you know what, I don't need a dress, I just need you, and it's such a lovely little relationship that really doesn't get as much love as the other two comparatively, and I think that's a shame.
Both Friedrich and John, they do parallel in that sense that they both feel at some point that they are not worth of this woman. With John is that Meg has all the pressure to marry a rich guy because she is the prettiest of the sisters. And especially Aunt Marge wants her to marry some rich man. And then there is that rumor going on that Meg has something going on with Laurie. And Mom is really mad about it, and which is understandable. But I think John also felt that he was too poor for her. Because, you know, Meg came from a poor family too. He didn't feel that he could give what she needed. That's also one of the reasons why he waited for her. I love that scene in Little Woman when Friedrich feels that he's not worthy of Joe, but it's also because he thinks that Joe is engaged to Laurie, and he can only base his views on Laurie to what Joe has told him, which is not a lot, and only that he's this rich neighbor and Joe's best friend. And that's pretty alarming when you're in love with this girl. And you hear that, okay, are they engaged? And he doesn't know that. And then he's so happy when he comes to Concord a year later, and then he finds out that Amy and Laurie are married. Joe is available.
Like, I always kind of, again, props to the 1970 version, as flawed as it is, they do handle that scene exactly as I kind of imagined it in the book, where, like, he's like, oh, yes, you're the friend. Hi, nice to meet you. And Laurie's like, oh, yeah, this is my wife. And he's like, oh, you're married. Okay, well, we can be friends. Like, now there's nothing holding me back from, you know. But the fact that he was willing to gracefully kind of step aside for Joe, if that was the case, is very endearing too. Like, it's only until after he realizes that Laurie is married to Amy and is not at all with Joe that he's like, oh, okay, now I can finally say my feelings. Which is very true with every version. Like, when he finds out that there is no Joe and Laurie, it's like, okay, now I can finally say what I feel. Otherwise, before, I was just willing to internalize it and just make me feel sad forever. Poor Friedrich. He was willing to do that for Joe if that was what she had wanted, but it ended up working well for everyone.
Such a nice scene when he's like, oh, and then the narrator mentions how Laurie thought he was the nicest German he ever met. He was so friendly. Right. It's a really funny scene. I really love the whole courting episode in the novel. He always wants what's best for Joe.
Again, it sort of makes me go like, oh, you two idiots, you love each other. Like how, you know, they always seem to be just happening to meet up at the same spot. Like, oh, I didn't see you there. Maybe I'll go with you to see your sister, and maybe I'll come home for a spot of coffee. I mean, not that I was waiting to see you. Joe being all like, Friedrich, oh, I mean, the professor is coffee this way. like, it's very clear to everyone except to each other, it would seem that you are madly in love, but like, I guess love makes you share one brain cell in this case. But then it leads to probably one of the most romantic scenes ever, with them just taking shelter with each other under an umbrella and saying how much they just love each other. Just all comes out in this moment of, I believe you're going away, and that makes me sad. It's like, no, I'm not going away. I promise I won't leave you. I love you too much. Like, it's just, oh, I love it. I love that scene so much.
It's a really romantic proposal.
I have nothing to give you but a full heart and empty hands, and the whole her taking his hand and saying, not empty now. It's like, this is true classic romanticism, you know. When people talk about like Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy holding Lizzie's hand, and people want to say Joe and Friedrich are not romantic. How dare you? You must not have read or watched that scene properly.
It's like when people say that Joe and Friedrich are not passionate enough. Then in the umbrella chapter, he's holding his voice crying, and then he asks her, why are you crying? And then she's like, because you're going away. And then we find out that he has been keeping Joe's poem with him for months and months. And they pretty much start to make out right after the proposal.
Right, and the fact that Joe, like, is the one who pretty much jumps on Friedrich, like, the fact that, despite the fact they're in the middle of a muddy road, is like, I just gotta kiss you because I can't hold it in, and just them making out while people are passing them and it's raining and their clothes are all muddy. Like, who cares? They gotta kiss here and now. Who cares who sees and whatnot? And particularly for back then, that was so scandalous.
Yeah, in the 19th century, it wasn't really seen as appropriate to have such public expression of
affection.
I read in another Louisa May Alcott novel, in the work Story of Experience, because there's the moment when David, who is once again based on Henry David Thoreau, when he confesses his feelings for Christine, who is the protagonist, he almost has the similar blurt that Friedrich has in the umbrella chapter, that he's been holding all these feelings inside and then he just lets it all out there when he confesses his love for her. And I think, it's something that Louisa kind of recycles in her stories. I think there's something similar in Rose in Bloom, when Mac confesses his feelings to Rose. When I read about Henry, he's quite similar to Friedrich in that sense, that he would take his time to think things through before he would express his opinion or something that he really wanted to say. There's a lot of descriptions about him that he was sort of more of a deep thinker, and then also in some ways very passionate person. Yeah, I think some of that must have come from Louisa's own experiences. Why else would she write about it in her novels? I've been talking about 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
Well, thank you, Christina, for joining me. This was lots of fun.
Yes, and thank you for inviting me. I've never been a part of a podcast before, so this is very exciting for me. And I hope that the listeners get a chance to, enjoy it as much as I did.
You can find you at Tumblr from the Joe and Friedrich blog. It's a great blog. People go and read it.
Thanks. I try my best.
That was our chat for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening. Take care and make good choices. Bye.